His next words changed their fate forever. Two Apache sisters begged the rancher for shelter. The autumn of 1886 swept across the Arizona Territory with an unexpected chill that caught even the most experienced ranchers off guard. Samuel Hartford stood on the wooden porch of his ranch house, watching the sky transform from pale blue to an ominous shade of gray. He had seen many storms in his 15 years working this harsh and unforgiving land, but something about this evening felt different. The air carried a strange heaviness, and the wind whispered through the scattered mesquite trees with an almost mournful sound. Samuel was a man shaped by solitude and hard work. At 45 years old, his face bore the deep lines carved by a relentless sun and countless worries. His hands were calloused and strong, the hands of a man who had built everything he owned from nothing but determination and sweat. The ranch wasn't large by the standards of the wealthy cattle barons who controlled vast territories, but it was his. Every fence post, every water trough, every building on this land represented a piece of his soul. He lived alone now, though it hadn't always been that way. There had been a wife once, Margaret, with her gentle smile and capable hands. She had died of fever 7 years ago, leaving Samuel to face the emptiness of the house they had built together. There had been talk of a child, too, a baby who never took her first breath. These losses had turned Samuel inward, making him a quiet man who spoke more to his horses than to other people. The cattle operation he ran was modest but profitable enough to sustain him. He had nearly 200 head of cattle scattered across the scrubland, and a small herd of horses that he bred and trained. The nearest town, a dusty settlement called Copper Springs, lay 15 miles to the east. Samuel made the journey once a month for supplies, exchanging brief pleasantries with the shopkeeper before returning to the isolation of his ranch. As the first drops of rain began to fall, Samuel turned to head inside. The temperature was dropping rapidly, and he could see his breath forming small clouds in the air. He had work to do before the storm truly arrived. The horses needed to be secured in the barn, and he wanted to bring extra firewood inside to keep the house warm through what promised to be a bitter night. That's when he heard it. A sound so faint that at first he thought he had imagined it. Knocking. Hesitant and weak, but unmistakable. Someone was at his door. Samuel froze. Visitors were rare at his remote ranch, especially as night approached. His hand instinctively moved toward the rifle he kept near the door. In this wild territory, caution wasn't just wise, it was essential for survival. Bandits, desperate men fleeing the law, or worse, could appear at any moment. He approached the door slowly, his muscles tense with readiness. The knocking came again, more urgent this time, but still strangely tentative. Samuel gripped the door handle and pulled it open, prepared for almost anything. What he saw on his porch, however, was something he could never have anticipated. Two girls stood before him, their small frames shaking violently from cold and fear. They were Apache, unmistakably so, with dark eyes that washed him with a mixture of desperate hope and deep mistrust. The older girl appeared to be about 14, tall and thin, with long black hair plastered to her face by the freezing rain. She stood slightly in front of her younger sister, a protective stance that spoke of her role as guardian. The younger one, perhaps 12 years old, clung to her sister's tattered dress, her eyes wide with exhaustion and terror. Both girls were soaked to the bone. Their clothing, traditional Apache garments that had seen better days, hung on them like rags. They wore no shoes, and their feet were cut and bleeding from traveling across the rocky terrain. Their lips had taken on a bluish tint from the cold, and their entire bodies trembled uncontrollably. Samuel stood paralyzed, his mind racing. Apache children, alone at his door, in the middle of a dangerous storm. The implications crashed over him like a wave. Relations between the Apache people and white settlers had been tense for decades, marked by violence, betrayal, and suffering on both sides. The great Apache leaders like Cochise and Mangus Coloradas were gone now, and Geronimo himself had surrendered just months earlier in September of 1886. The last free Apache bands were being hunted down relentlessly by the United States Army and forced onto reservations. Any settler caught harboring Apache could face serious consequences. Samuel's neighbors, the few who lived within a day's ride, held deep hatred for the Apache. Many had lost family members or livestock in raids over the years. If word spread that Samuel had taken in Apache children, he could lose everything. His cattle operation depended on cooperation with other ranchers. His safety depended on maintaining good standing with the territorial authorities. The older girl spoke then, her voice barely above a whisper. The words came in broken English mixed with Apache and Spanish, a desperate jumble of sounds that Samuel strained to understand. She gestured toward the mountains, toward the darkening sky, toward her sister. Her hands moved in expressive gestures that transcended language. They needed help. They needed shelter. They were alone and afraid. Samuel looked into the older girl's eyes and saw something that shook him to his core. He saw the same desperate determination he had witnessed in Margaret's eyes during her final days, when she fought with every ounce of strength to survive. He saw the fierce protective love of someone willing to sacrifice everything for a loved one. He saw reflected back at him the very essence of what it meant to be human and vulnerable and in need. The younger sister's teeth were chattering so violently that Samuel could hear them from where he stood. A particularly strong gust of wind swept across the porch and both girls swayed, nearly falling. The storm was intensifying. Within minutes, the temperature would drop even further. Without shelter, without warmth, these children would not survive the night. That was a simple, undeniable fact. Samuel Hartford stood at a crossroads that went far beyond the simple question of opening his door. He stood at a moment that would define who he truly was, what he truly believed, and what kind of man he would be for the rest of his life. Every practical consideration screamed at him to turn them away. Every social norm of his time and place demanded that he protect himself first. Every survival instinct warned him of the dangers of getting involved. But there was something else, something deeper than fear or practicality. There was the memory of Margaret, who had always possessed a compassion that he admired, but never quite matched. There was the ghost of the daughter he never got to raise, who would be about the age of these girls if she had lived. There was the fundamental question of what it meant to be a decent human being when faced with suffering. The older girl took a small step forward, her hand outstretched in a gesture of pleading. Her voice cracked as she tried again to communicate, this time with a single word that Samuel understood perfectly. Please. That one word, spoken in desperation by a child trying to protect her sister, cut through all of Samuel's defenses. He looked at these two young girls, soaked and shivering and terrified, and he saw not Apache or enemy or danger. He saw two children who needed help. Samuel Hartford made his choice. He stepped back from the doorway and spoke 3 simple words that would change everything. Come in, please. The relief that flooded the older girl's face was immediate and overwhelming. For just a moment, the stoic mask she had maintained crumbled completely, revealing the frightened child beneath. She grabbed her sister's hand and they stumbled across the threshold into the warmth of Samuel's home, bringing with them all the complications and challenges and unexpected blessings that would transform his solitary existence into something he had never imagined possible. As Samuel closed the door against the storm, he had no way of knowing that this single act of compassion would set in motion events that would test his courage, challenge his community, and ultimately create a family born not from blood, but from the simple choice to show mercy when the world expected hardness. Samuel closed the door behind the 2 shivering girls and for a moment simply stood there, uncertain of what to do next. The warmth of his home seemed to emphasize just how cold and wet they were. Water dripped from their clothes onto the wooden floor, forming small puddles around their bare, bleeding feet. The younger girl swayed slightly, her eyes struggling to stay open. Samuel realized with a jolt that they weren't just cold and scared, they were on the verge of complete exhaustion. His instincts as a rancher kicked in. He had nursed sick cattle and horses back to health countless times. The basics were the same, he told himself. Warmth, food, rest. He moved quickly to the fireplace and added more wood, stoking the flames until they roared with heat. Then he turned to face his unexpected guests, who stood exactly where he had left them, watching him with wide, cautious eyes. Samuel pointed to the chairs near the fireplace and gestured for them to sit. The older girl hesitated, then slowly moved toward the warmth, pulling their sister along with her. They sat on the very edge of the chairs, as if ready to run at any moment. Samuel disappeared into his bedroom and returned with 2 thick wool blankets that had belonged to Margaret. They still smelled faintly of lavender, a scent that brought a sharp pang of memory. He approached slowly, as one might approach a frightened animal, and offered the blankets. The older girl took them with trembling hands, wrapping one around her sister first before covering herself. Samuel noticed that despite her own desperate condition, she made sure her younger sister was cared for before attending to her own needs. This simple act told him something important about who these girls were. The language barrier presented an immediate challenge. Samuel knew only a handful of Spanish words and no Apache at all. The older girl seemed to understand some English, but her vocabulary was limited. Through gestures and simple words, Samuel managed to communicate that he wanted to help. He pointed to their feet and winced at the cuts and bruises he saw there. He retrieved a basin of warm water and some clean cloth, but when he approached, both girls flinched backward. The older girl said something sharp in Apache, positioning herself protectively in front of her sister. Samuel realized his mistake. These girls had every reason to fear him, to fear any white man. He had no idea what they had experienced, what horrors they might have witnessed. He set the basin down at a respectful distance and stepped back, gesturing that they could use it themselves if they wished. After a long moment of consideration, the older girl slowly reached for the basin. She carefully washed her sister's feet first, wincing at each cut and scrape. Samuel watched as she worked with gentle efficiency, her young face showing a maturity far beyond her years. When she finished with her sister, she tended to her own feet. Samuel left the room briefly and returned with some of Margaret's old clothes. They would be too large, but they were dry and warm. Again he offered them at a distance, and again the older girl accepted them with a cautious nod. Samuel turned his back to give them privacy as they changed. He busied himself in the kitchen area, putting together a simple meal. He had stew left over from his own dinner, and he warmed it on the stove along with some bread. The smell of food filled the small house, and he heard the younger girl's stomach growl loudly even from across the room. When he turned around, both girls had changed into the oversized dresses. They looked almost comical, swimming in fabric meant for a grown woman, but at least they were dry. The younger girl's eyes were fixed on the pot of stew with an intensity that broke Samuel's heart. How long had it been since they had eaten a proper meal? He ladled the stew into 2 bowls and set them on the table along with chunks of bread. The girls didn't move until he gestured for them to eat and took a seat across the room, deliberately giving them space. The younger girl looked at her older sister, who nodded permission. Then they fell upon the food with a desperate hunger that confirmed Samuel's suspicions. They had been starving. Samuel sat quietly watching them eat. The younger girl finished first and looked longingly at the pot. Without a word, Samuel refilled her bowl. She looked at him with surprise and something that might have been the beginning of gratitude. The older girl ate more slowly, never taking her eyes off Samuel for long, always watchful and protective. As the immediate crisis of cold and hunger was addressed, Samuel found himself wondering what came next. Who were these girls? Where had they come from? What had happened to their family? The questions multiplied in his mind, but he had no way to ask them, not yet. Over the next few days, a tentative routine emerged. Samuel set up sleeping arrangements in the small spare room that had once been intended as a nursery. He gave the girls blankets and showed them where everything was. They slept huddled together on the single bed, and Samuel often heard the younger one crying softly in the night, with her sister whispering comfort in their native language. Communication happened in fragments. Through a combination of broken English, gestures, Spanish words, and drawings, pieces of the girl's story slowly emerged. The older sister, Samuel learned, was named Desba. The younger was called Kaya. They had been traveling with their family, trying to evade the soldiers who were rounding up the last free Apache bands. There had been an attack, though, whether from soldiers or from another group, Samuel couldn't quite determine. Their parents were gone. They had been wandering alone for weeks, maybe longer, surviving on whatever they could find. Desba proved to be remarkably resourceful. She showed Samuel how she had been trapping small animals using snares made from plant fibers. She demonstrated tracking techniques, reading signs in the earth that Samuel had never learned to see. Despite her youth, she carried herself with a quiet dignity and strength that commanded respect. She was determined to take care of Kaya, no matter what it took. Kaya was different. Where Desba was serious and watchful, Kaya had moments of childhood joy that would break through her trauma. Samuel once found her laughing at the antics of his old barn cat, a sound so pure and unexpected that it made him smile. She seemed to warm to Samuel more quickly than her sister, though she always checked with Desba before accepting anything from him. Samuel began teaching them basic ranch work, more through demonstration than words. He showed them how to feed the horses, how to collect eggs from the chickens, how to pump water from the well. Both girls learned with remarkable speed. They understood animals in a way that impressed even Samuel, who had spent his entire adult life working with livestock. Desba had a natural gift with horses. They responded to her calm presence and gentle touch in ways they rarely did with Samuel. The days settled into an unexpected rhythm. Samuel would rise early, as he always had, and find the girls already awake. They would share a simple breakfast, often in silence, then go about the day's work. Kaya proved to be curious about everything, pointing at objects and trying to learn their English names. Samuel found himself becoming something of a teacher, repeating words slowly and clearly. Desba participated less in these language lessons, but he noticed she was always listening, always learning. Evenings were spent near the fireplace. Abiel would work on mending tack or other ranch tasks while the girls sat together, sometimes talking quietly in Apache, sometimes sitting in companionable silence. Occasionally, Kaya would hum soft melodies that Samuel assumed were traditional Apache songs. The sound filled the empty spaces of his house in a way he hadn't realized he needed. But beneath this fragile domestic peace, tension simmered. Samuel was acutely aware that this situation could not remain hidden forever. His ranch was remote, but not isolated. Other ranchers passed through occasionally. He would need to go to town for supplies soon. What would he do then? How could he explain the presence of 2 Apache girls? More pressingly, what were his intentions? He had acted on impulse, driven by compassion and basic human decency. But that single decision had created responsibilities he was only beginning to understand. These girls needed more than temporary shelter. They needed protection, education, a future. Could he provide those things? Should he try? The question that haunted Samuel most was, what would happen if someone discovered them? The neighbors to his east, the Pritchard family, had lost a son to an Apache raid 5 years ago. They would not understand or forgive Samuel's choice to harbor Apache children. Tom Pritchard was known for his fierce hatred and his quick temper. If he found out, the consequences could be severe. And Samuel also worried about the law. The United States Army was actively relocating Apache people to reservations, particularly San Carlos in southeastern Arizona. The conditions there were reportedly grim, with inadequate food, disease, and harsh treatment. The thought of sending Desba and Kaya to such a place made Samuel's stomach turn, but was he breaking the law by keeping them here? Could he be arrested or lose his ranch? These worries occupied Samuel's mind constantly, but when he looked at the girls, at the way Kaya was beginning to smile more often, at the way Desba's shoulders had started to relax slightly, he knew he couldn't simply turn them over to the authorities. Not yet, maybe not ever. 3 months passed in this uncertain peace. The girls' English improved steadily. They became more comfortable in the house, more confident in their movements. Desba even smiled occasionally, a rare and precious sight. Samuel found himself looking forward to their presence, to the sound of voices in his home, to feeling needed and useful in a way that went beyond simply maintaining his ranch. But he knew, deep in his heart, that this fragile peace could not last forever. Someone would come eventually, someone would ask questions. And when that happened, Samuel Hartford would have to make choices that would determine not just his own fate, but the fate of 2 young girls who had stumbled into his life on a stormy autumn night. The reckoning he feared came on a cold February morning when 3 riders appeared on the horizon, heading straight for his ranch. Even from a distance, Samuel recognized the glint of a marshal's badge. His heart sank as he realized the moment he had been dreading had finally arrived. The 3 riders appeared as dark silhouettes against the pale morning sky, moving steadily towards Samuel's ranch. He had been mending a section of fence near the main house when he spotted them, and his first instinct was to look toward the barn where Desba and Kaya were tending to the horses. The girls had not yet noticed the approaching riders, and Samuel felt his chest tighten with a fear he hadn't experienced since the day he found Margaret burning with fever. Samuel set down his tools and walked slowly toward the house, trying to appear casual even as his mind raced through possibilities. He could see now that the lead rider wore a badge that caught the sunlight, a United States Marshal. The 2 men flanking him were deputies, both armed and sitting their horses with the rigid posture of men accustomed to enforcing the law through intimidation when necessary. As Samuel reached his porch, he turned and caught Desba's eye across the yard. She had stopped working and was watching the approaching riders with the wariness of a deer sensing danger. Samuel made a subtle gesture, one they had practiced during the long winter months. It meant danger, hide, stay quiet. Desba immediately grabbed Kaya's hand, and the 2 girls slipped into the barn, disappearing into the shadows among the hay bales and equipment. Samuel's heart hammered in his chest, but he forced his face into a neutral expression. He had learned over 15 years of ranching in rough territory that showing fear was the quickest way to lose any negotiation. He stood on his porch, one hand resting casually against the support post, and waited as the 3 lawmen rode into his yard. The marshal was a man in his 50s, with iron-gray hair and a face carved from granite. His eyes were the cold blue of winter ice, and they swept across Samuel's property with methodical precision. He brought his horse to a stop a respectful distance from the porch and touched the brim of his hat in greeting. "Morning," the marshal said, his voice carrying the flat accent of someone from back east. "Name's Thornton, United States Marshal out of Tucson. These are my deputies, Rawlings and Chen." "Samuel Hartford," Samuel replied, keeping his voice steady. "What brings the law out to my place, Marshal?" Thornton leaned forward in his saddle, leather creaking. "We've had reports, Mr. Hartford. Reports of Apache being seen on your property." Samuel felt his blood run cold, but he kept his expression carefully blank. "Apache? Who would report such a thing? A traveler passing through claimed he saw 2 Apache children here about 6 weeks back," Thornton said, watching Samuel's face carefully. "He said he saw them working around your barn clear as day. Now I told myself that couldn't be right. No sensible rancher would harbor Apache, especially not with all that's been happening. But I had to come check it out for myself. It's my job." Samuel's mind whirled. 6 weeks ago, That would have been when old Josiah Mercer passed through, asking to water his horses. Samuel had thought the man hadn't seen the girls, who had been working in the far pasture. Apparently, he had been wrong. Lots of travelers see lots of things out here in the desert, Samuel said carefully. Heat plays tricks on the eyes. Shadows can look like people. I've seen it myself plenty of times. Thornton's expression didn't change. That may be so. But I still need to search your property, Mr. Hartford. Just to be thorough, you understand. I'm sure you've got nothing to hide. It wasn't really a request, Samuel knew. Thornton had the authority to search whether Samuel consented or not. Refusing would only make him look guilty and could escalate the situation into violence. But allowing the search meant risking everything. Desba and Kaya were hiding in the barn, the most obvious place the marshal would want to look. Marshal Thornton, Samuel said, choosing his words with extreme care, I respect the law and I understand you have a job to do. But I also have rights as a property owner. What exactly are you looking for? Thornton's eyes narrowed slightly. You know what I'm looking for, Mr. Hartford. Any Apache found off the reservation need to be rounded up and relocated to San Carlos. Those are my orders, coming from the territorial governor himself. We're gathering up the stragglers, the ones who didn't go in with Geronimo's surrender. San Carlos. Samuel had heard stories about that place from the few Apache who had escaped and from sympathetic soldiers who had witnessed conditions there. Overcrowding, insufficient food, disease running rampant through the camps, and treatment that bordered on cruelty. The thought of Desba and Kaya in such a place made Samuel's stomach turn. I heard conditions at San Carlos aren't fit for animals, much less people, Samuel said quietly. That's not for you or me to decide, Thornton replied, his voice hardening. The government makes policy. We enforce it. Now, are you going to let me search your property voluntarily, or do I need to cite my authority and do it anyway? Samuel could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him. From where he stood, he could see the barn door, slightly ajar. Somewhere in that building, 2 frightened girls were hiding, listening to every word of this conversation. Their fate hung on what Samuel said and did in the next few minutes. He thought about his ranch, built through 15 years of brutal work. He thought about his reputation in the territory, the carefully constructed web of relationships with other ranchers that made survival possible in this harsh land. He thought about the very real possibility of being arrested, of losing everything he owned. Then he thought about Desba's fierce protectiveness of her younger sister, about the way Kaya had slowly learned to laugh again, about the 3 months they had spent becoming something that felt almost like a family. He thought about what Margaret would have done, what she would have expected of him. Marshal, Samuel said slowly, I need to ask you something man to man. Those orders you have about rounding up Apache for San Carlos, do you believe in them? In your heart, do you think that's right? Thornton's expression shifted slightly, a flicker of something that might have been discomfort crossing his weathered features. What I believe doesn't matter. I have my orders. It matters to me, Samuel pressed, because I need to know if I'm talking to a man who's just following orders or a man who believes in justice. Justice, Thornton said, his voice taking on an edge, is what the law says it is. No, Samuel said quietly but firmly. Justice is something deeper than that. It's about right and wrong, about protecting the innocent, about mercy. One of the deputies, the younger one named Rawlings, shifted uncomfortably in his saddle. Thornton's jaw tightened. You're trying my patience, Mr. Hartford. Step aside and let me search your property. Samuel knew the moment had come. He could step aside, let them search, and hope that Desba and Kaya had hidden themselves well enough. But he also knew that Thornton was a professional lawman, experienced and thorough. He would find them. It was only a matter of time. Or Samuel could do something he had never imagined himself capable of. He could take a stand that would change everything. I can't let you do that, Marshal, Samuel heard himself say, his voice steady despite the fear coursing through him. The atmosphere changed instantly. Both deputies' hands moved toward their weapons. Thornton's eyes went cold and hard. Are you obstructing a federal officer in the performance of his duties, Mr. Hartford? I'm protecting my family, Samuel said, and as the words left his mouth, he realized they were true. Somewhere over the past 3 months, without quite acknowledging it to himself, he had started thinking of Desba and Kaya as his responsibility, his to protect and care for. Your family, Thornton repeated slowly. You're saying those Apache children are your family? Samuel took a deep breath. This was the moment. The words he spoke now would determine everything. Those girls came to me during a storm, starving and terrified. Their family was killed. They had nobody. I took them in, and I've been caring for them, teaching them, giving them a home. So yes, Marshal, they're my family now. That's not how family works, Thornton said flatly. You can't just claim Apache children as your own. Why not? Samuel challenged. If their own people are gone, if they have nobody else, why shouldn't I be able to care for them? What kind of law says I have to turn away children in need? Thornton leaned back in his saddle, studying Samuel with new interest. You're talking about legal guardianship. That would require approval from a territorial judge. Paperwork. Legal proceedings. And I can tell you right now, no judge is going to grant guardianship of Apache children to a white rancher. It's unprecedented. Unprecedented doesn't mean impossible, Samuel said. Even if a judge was willing to consider it, which I doubt, the process would take months, Thornton continued. And in the meantime, my orders are clear. Any Apache found off reservation get rounded up for relocation. That includes children. Samuel's hand had unconsciously moved to rest on the porch railing, close to where he kept his rifle just inside the door. He wasn't sure what he would do if Thornton tried to force his way to the barn, but he knew he couldn't just stand aside. Marshal Thornton, Samuel said, keeping his voice calm and reasonable, you seem like a decent man doing a job you maybe don't entirely believe in. I'm asking you, as one man to another, to give me a chance to do this right. Let me ride to Tucson and petition the territorial judge for legal guardianship. Give me 30 days to make my case. If the judge denies it, I'll comply with the law. You have my word on that. Your word? Thornton said skeptically. And what's to stop you from disappearing with those girls the moment I ride away? This ranch, Samuel said simply. Everything I own is here. 15 years of my life is in this land. I'm not going anywhere. You can check on me, send deputies to verify I'm still here. But I'm asking for a chance to do this properly, through the legal system. The silence stretched out, broken only by the sound of the wind and the restless movements of the horses. Thornton's deputies watched their commander, waiting for orders. Samuel could see the calculation happening behind the marshal's eyes, weighing options and consequences. Finally, Thornton spoke. Let me see them. Samuel's heart sank. Marshal, if you want me to even consider giving you time, I need to see these girls with my own eyes, Thornton interrupted. I need to verify they're really children in need and not warriors hiding out. I need to see that they're being properly cared for, and I need to see that they're staying of their own will. It was a compromise, Samuel realized. Not the one he wanted, but perhaps the best he could hope for. Slowly he nodded. He turned toward the barn and called out in the simple phrases he and Desba had practiced. It's safe. Come out. Slow. For a long moment nothing happened. Then the barn door opened wider, and Desba emerged, walking with dignity despite her obvious fear. She held Kaya's hand, and the younger girl stayed close to her sister's side. They walked across the yard and came to stand beside Samuel on the porch. Thornton studied them carefully. Both girls wore simple dresses that Samuel had purchased in town. Their hair was clean and braided, and though they were thin, they clearly weren't starving. They looked like children being cared for, not prisoners or servants. What are your names? Thornton asked, directing his question to Desba. Desba, the older girl said clearly, her English much improved from 3 months ago. This is Kaya, my sister. How old are you? 14 summers. Kaya is 12. And you're staying here willingly? This man hasn't forced you or hurt you? Desba looked at Samuel, then back at the marshal. He gave us shelter when we had none, food when we were hungry. He teaches us and protects us. We stay because we choose to stay. Thornton was quiet for a long moment, then he sighed heavily. Mister Hartford, what you're doing here is irregular at best and illegal at worst, but I can see these girls are being treated well. He paused, seeming to wrestle with himself. I'll give you 30 days. 1 month from today, I'll return to this ranch. You either have legal guardianship papers from a territorial judge, or I'm taking these girls to San Carlos. And if you've run, I'll track you down and you'll face federal charges. Are we clear? Relief flooded through Samuel so intensely that his knees nearly buckled. Crystal clear, Marshal. Thank you. Don't thank me yet, Thornton said grimly. Getting Judge Morrison to approve something like this? You've got about as much chance as a snowball in August. But I suppose everyone deserves their day in court. He turned his horse. 30 days, Mr. Hartford. Don't make me regret this. As the 3 lawmen rode away, Samuel felt Desba's hand slip into his, and on his other side, Kaya did the same. They stood together on the porch, watching the riders disappear into the distance, united by the understanding that the real fight was just beginning. The dust from Marshal Thornton's departure had barely settled when Samuel realized the enormity of what he had just promised. 30 days to convince a territorial judge to grant him legal guardianship of 2 Apache girls during a time when tensions between settlers and the Apache people remained dangerously high. 30 days to accomplish something that Thornton himself had called unprecedented. The weight of it pressed down on Samuel's shoulders like a physical burden. Desba squeezed his hand gently, pulling him from his thoughts. When he looked down at her, he saw understanding in her dark eyes. She had heard every word of the exchange with the marshal. She knew exactly what was at stake. "We go to San Carlos if Judge says no?" Kaya asked in halting English, her young voice trembling slightly. Samuel knelt down so he was at eye level with both girls. "I'm going to do everything in my power to make sure that doesn't happen," he said firmly. "But I need to be honest with you. This won't be easy. Many people won't understand why I want to do this. Some will be angry. The judge might say no." "Then we run," Desba said simply, her chin lifting with determination. "We survived before. We survive again." "No," Samuel said, shaking his head. "If we run, they'll hunt us down and I'll go to jail. Then you'll have nobody. We do this the right way, through the law. We fight for this in court." Over the next 2 days, Samuel prepared for his journey to Tucson. He needed to find a lawyer, someone who could help him navigate the legal complexities of what he was attempting. He also needed to gather evidence that he was a suitable guardian, character references from other ranchers, proof that he could provide for the girls both financially and practically. The problem was that asking for help meant revealing what he had done. Every person he told was a potential enemy, someone who might work against him rather than support him. Samuel had never felt so isolated, so aware of how few true friends he had in the territory. He decided to start with Jacob Reinhardt, a German immigrant who ran a ranch about 12 miles to the south. Jacob was a quiet man, deeply religious, who had always treated Samuel with respect and fairness in their business dealings. If anyone might understand Samuel's position, it would be Jacob. Samuel rode out on the 3rd morning after the marshal's visit, leaving Desba and Kaya with strict instructions to stay hidden if anyone approached. The ride to Jacob's ranch gave him time to rehearse what he would say, though he knew that no amount of preparation could fully predict how this conversation would go. Jacob was working in his forge when Samuel arrived, shaping a piece of metal that would become part of a new gate. He was a broad-shouldered man with a thick beard and hands scarred from years of hard work. He looked up as Samuel dismounted, wiping sweat from his forehead. "Samuel," Jacob said in his heavy accent, his face breaking into a smile, "what brings you out this way?" Samuel took a deep breath. "I need to talk to you, Jacob, about something important, something that might change how you see me." The smile faded from Jacob's face, replaced by concern. "That sounds serious? Come, let's have coffee." They sat in Jacob's simple kitchen and Samuel told him everything. About finding the girls on his porch during the storm, about the 3 months they had lived with him, about Marshal Thornton's visit and the 30-day deadline. Jacob listened without interrupting, his weathered face impossible to read. When Samuel finished, silence filled the kitchen. Jacob stared into his coffee cup as if searching for answers in its dark depths. Finally, he looked up. "You know what people will say," Jacob said quietly. "They will call you a traitor. They will say you've betrayed your own kind." "I know," Samuel said. "Tom Pritchard lost his son to an Apache raid. He will not understand this. He will be furious." "I know that too." Jacob was quiet for another long moment. Then he said, "In the old country, my family was persecuted. We were different, spoke a different language, worshipped in a different way. People wanted to drive us out, to punish us for being who we were. When I came to America, I thought I was leaving that hatred behind." He paused, his eyes distant with memory. "But hatred is everywhere, Samuel. It just wears different faces." Samuel felt a spark of hope. "Does that mean you'll help me?" "Those girls," Jacob said. "They are truly orphans?" "They have no family. As far as I can determine, yes. Their family was killed. They were wandering alone, starving." Jacob nodded slowly. "Then yes, I will help you. I will write a letter for the judge saying you are a man of good character. But Samuel, you must understand something. This will cost you. Even if you win in court, there will be ranchers who will never do business with you again. There will be people who see you as an enemy." "I understand," Samuel said, "but I can't turn those girls over to San Carlos. It would destroy them." "Then we fight," Jacob said, extending his hand. "God will judge whether we are right or wrong, but at least we will have done what we believed was just." With Jacob's support secured, Samuel felt emboldened to approach others. His next stop was Martha Chen, a widow who ran a successful trading post in Copper Springs. Martha was known for her sharp business sense and her even sharper tongue, but she was also fair-minded and had always treated Samuel honestly. Martha listened to his story while sorting through a shipment of dry goods, her hands never stopping their work even as her eyes grew thoughtful. When he finished, she set down the sack of flour she was holding and fixed him with a penetrating stare. "You're either the bravest man I've ever met or the biggest fool," she said bluntly. "Maybe both." "I need a character reference for the judge," Samuel said. "I know it's asking a lot, but of course I'll write you a letter," Martha interrupted. "You think I want to see children sent to San Carlos? I've traded with Apache for 20 years. They're people, same as anyone else. Some good, some bad, most just trying to survive." She paused. "But Samuel, you need more than character references. You need a good lawyer, and that's going to cost money." "How much money?" Martha named a figure that made Samuel wince. It was nearly all of his savings. Money he had been setting aside for expanding his herd. But what good was expanding his herd if he lost Desba and Kaya in the process? "There's a lawyer in Tucson named Benjamin Whitmore," Martha continued. "He's got a reputation for taking on difficult cases. Some call him a troublemaker because he's defended Chinese immigrants and Mexican families against land grabbers. But he wins more often than he loses. If anyone can help you, it's him." Armed with this information and letters of support from both Jacob and Martha, Samuel made the long journey to Tucson. The city was dusty and growing, filled with the noise of construction and commerce. Samuel felt overwhelmed by the crowds after months of isolation on his ranch. Finding Benjamin Whitmore's office proved easier than expected. It was a small building near the courthouse, with a simple sign hanging outside. Samuel tied his horse and climbed the stairs, his heart pounding with nervousness. Benjamin Whitmore was not what Samuel had expected. He was a young man, probably not yet 30, with intense dark eyes and ink-stained fingers. His office was chaos, papers stacked everywhere, law books lying open across every surface. "Mr. Hartford," Whitmore said, rising to shake Samuel's hand after listening to his initial explanation. "What you're asking for is indeed unprecedented. I've researched territorial law, and I can find no case where a white settler has been granted legal guardianship of Apache children." Samuel's heart sank. "So it's impossible?" "I didn't say impossible," Whitmore corrected, a slight smile playing at his lips. "I said unprecedented. There's a difference. The law doesn't explicitly forbid it, which means there's room to argue. But I need to be honest with you. Judge Morrison is a conservative man, very concerned with public opinion. Convincing him will require a compelling case." "What kind of case?" Whitmore leaned back in his chair, fingers stippled beneath his chin. "We need to demonstrate several things. First, that you are of good moral character and financially capable of providing for the girls. Second, that the girls genuinely wish to remain with you and are not being coerced. Third, and this is crucial, we need to show that placing them in your care serves their best interests better than the alternative." "San Carlos," Samuel said grimly. "Exactly. We'll need testimony about conditions there. We'll need to paint a picture of two options: a safe, stable home with you, or a reservation where disease and malnutrition are common. We make the judge see that this isn't about politics or race. It's about the welfare of two children." Samuel felt hope rising in his chest. "Can we win?" Whitmore was quiet for a moment. "If I'm being completely honest, I'd say we have maybe a 30% chance. Judge Morrison has denied similar petitions before, though not exactly like this. But 30% is better than zero, and I believe in fighting for what's right even when the odds are against us." He paused. "I'll take your case, Mr. A. Hartford. But you need to prepare yourself for the possibility of failure." The hearing was scheduled for 3 weeks away, giving Whitmore time to prepare their argument. Samuel returned to his ranch to find Desba and Kaya safe but anxious. They had been alone for nearly a week, the longest Samuel had left them since they arrived. Kaya ran to him the moment he dismounted, wrapping her arms around his waist. "You came back," she said, relief evident in her voice. "Of course I came back," Samuel said, surprised. "Why would you think I wouldn't?" Desba approached more slowly. "People leave," she said simply. "People make promises and then they leave." Samuel understood then. These girls had lost everyone they loved. They had learned not to trust in permanence, not to believe that anyone would stay. He knelt down and looked both of them in the eyes. "I made you a promise," he said. "I'm going to fight for you. And whether we win or lose in court, I want you to know something. You are not alone anymore. You matter to me. You've become my family, and I don't abandon family." Tears welled up in Kaya's eyes. Even Desba, usually so controlled, blinked rapidly as if fighting emotion. Samuel pulled them both into an embrace, and they stood there in the fading afternoon light, 3 people bound together by circumstances and choice. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of preparation. Whitmore sent detailed letters explaining what the girls should expect in court, how they should dress, what kinds of questions they might be asked. Samuel practiced with them, helping them prepare their testimony while trying not to make them more nervous than they already were. Jacob and Martha both agreed to testify on Samuel's behalf. Even old Miguel Torres, a Mexican rancher who had known Samuel for years, offered to speak about Samuel's character. Samuel was moved by this support, though he knew it came at a cost. Tom Pritchard had already begun spreading word about what Samuel was doing, calling him a traitor and worse. On the night before they were due to leave for Tucson in the hearing, Samuel found Desba sitting on the porch, staring up at the stars. He sat down beside her, and for a while they simply shared the silence. "Are you scared?" Samuel asked finally. "Yes," Desba admitted. "But also," she paused, searching for the right words in English, "also hopeful. Before we came here, Kaya and I had nothing. No future. Just survival day to day. You gave us more than shelter. You gave us hope that maybe life could be good again. Whatever happens tomorrow," Samuel said, "that doesn't change. You'll always have a home with me, even if we have to find another way to make it work." Desba looked at him, and in the starlight, Samuel saw the fierce determination that had kept her and her sister alive through unimaginable hardship. "Then we go to court," she said, "and we show them why we belong together." The next morning they set out for Tucson. Samuel drove the wagon with Desba and Kaya beside him, each mile bringing them closer to a moment that would determine their future. As the city came into view, Samuel felt the weight of what they were about to attempt, but he also felt something else, something he hadn't experienced in years. He felt like he was fighting for something that truly mattered, for family that he had somehow found when he least expected it. Whatever Judge Morrison decided, Samuel knew that his life had already changed forever. The question now was whether the law would recognize what his heart already knew, that these three people, brought together by chance and bound by choice, deserved the right to call themselves a family. The Tucson courthouse was an imposing building of adobe and stone, its thick walls designed to keep out the desert heat. Samuel had passed by it many times over the years, but had never imagined he would one day stand inside it fighting for something so precious. As he helped Desba and Kaya down from the wagon, he noticed their hands were trembling. His own weren't much steadier. Benjamin Whitmore met them at the courthouse steps, his arms full of papers and law books. Despite the early hour, sweat already beaded on his forehead from the climbing temperature. "Remember what we discussed," he said, directing his words to the girls. "Answer the judge's questions honestly and clearly. Don't be afraid to show emotion, but try to stay calm. The judge needs to see that you're thoughtful young women who understand what you're asking for." Inside, the courtroom was cooler but no less intimidating. Wooden benches lined both sides of a central aisle, and at the front sat an elevated desk where Judge Morrison would preside. The judge's chair was empty for now, but its presence loomed over the room like a silent authority. Samuel noticed that the spectator benches were already filling with curious townspeople who had heard about this unusual case. Samuel recognized some faces. There was Martha Chen, who had come to offer her support. Jacob Reinhardt sat near the front, his Sunday hat held respectfully in his hands. But there were also hostile faces, people Samuel didn't know whose expressions ranged from skeptical to openly angry. The case had drawn attention throughout the territory, and opinions were sharply divided. Marshal Thornton entered and took a seat near the back. His presence was a reminder of what failure would mean. If Judge Morrison denied the petition, Thornton would be obligated to take Desba and Kaya to San Carlos immediately. The thought made Samuel's stomach clench with anxiety. A door at the side of the courtroom opened, and everyone rose as Judge Morrison entered. He was a man in his 60s, with white hair and a lined face that suggested he had seen much of life's harshness. His expression was stern and unreadable as he settled into his chair and arranged his papers before him. "Be seated," the judge said, his voice carrying easily through the room. "We are here today to consider a petition for guardianship. Samuel Hartford seeks legal guardianship of two Apache miners, Desba and Kaya, whose family names are unknown. Mr. Whitmore, you may present your case." Benjamin Whitmore stood, straightening his coat. "Thank you, Your Honor. This is indeed an unusual case, but it is also a straightforward one when we focus on what matters most, the welfare of two children. My client, Mr. Hartford, is a respected rancher who has demonstrated both the financial means and the moral character necessary to provide a stable, loving home for these girls." For the next hour, Whitmore methodically built his case. He called Jacob Reinhardt to the stand first. Jacob testified about Samuel's integrity, his reputation in the community, and his capability as a rancher. Under Whitmore's gentle questioning, Jacob described the ranch's profitability and Samuel's responsible stewardship of his land and animals. "Would you trust Mr. Hartford to care for your own children?" Whitmore asked. "Without hesitation," Jacob replied firmly. "Samuel Hartford is as honest and decent a man as I have ever known." Martha Chen came next, and she was equally compelling. She spoke of Samuel's years of fair dealing in business and his reputation for keeping his word. But she also went further, addressing the elephant in the room directly. "Some might say it's strange for a white man to seek guardianship of Apache children," she said, looking directly at the judge. "But I've lived in this territory for 30 years. I've seen enough hatred and enough violence to last a lifetime. What Mr. Hartford is doing isn't strange. It's decent. It's what any good person should do when children need help." The prosecution, represented by Territorial Attorney Gerald Haskins, cross-examined both witnesses aggressively. He tried to suggest that Samuel's motives were questionable, that perhaps he wanted cheap labor or had some other ulterior purpose. But both Jacob and Martha held firm, their testimonies unshaken. Then it was time for the most crucial testimony of all. Whitmore called Desba to the stand. Samuel watched as she walked to the front of the courtroom, her back straight and her head held high. She wore a simple blue dress that Martha had helped her choose, and her long hair was neatly braided. She looked young and vulnerable, but there was also a quiet strength in the way she carried herself. After being sworn in, Desba sat in the witness chair and folded her hands in her lap. Whitmore approached with an encouraging smile. "Desba, can you tell the court how you came to be at Mr. Hartford's ranch?" In clear English that showed how much she had learned over the past months, Desba told their story. She spoke of the attack that killed their parents, of weeks spent wandering and starving, of the desperation that led them to knock on a stranger's door during the storm. Her voice remained steady, though Samuel saw her hands tighten their grip on each other. "What did you think would happen when Mr. Hartford opened that door?" Whitmore asked gently. "I thought he would turn us away," Desba said honestly. "Or maybe worse. We had learned that most white men did not help Apache. They saw us as enemies. I was prepared to beg, to offer to work, anything to get shelter for my sister. But he did not ask for anything. He just helped us." "And in the months since then, how has Mr. Hartford treated you?" Desba's voice grew stronger. "He has treated us with kindness. Well, he feeds us, teaches us, keeps us safe. He is patient when we make mistakes. He does not force us to do anything. He asks what we want, what we need. He cares about us." Do you want to stay with Mr. Hartford?" "Yes," Desba said without hesitation. "He has given us a home. Before we had only survival. Now we have a life." Haskins, the territorial attorney, stood for his cross-examination. He was a thin man with sharp features and a voice that could cut like a knife. "Ms. Desba, you say Mr. Hartford has been kind to you, but isn't it true that you have nowhere else to go? That you're dependent on his charity?" "We are grateful for his help," Desba replied carefully, "and if he decided tomorrow that he no longer wanted you, you would have no choice but to leave, correct?" Whitmore started to object, but Desba answered before he could. "That is true of any family. Children depend on their parents."
"That is what family means," Haskins pressed on.
"But Mr. Hartford is not your father. He's a white man with no connection to your people or your culture. How can he possibly understand what you need?" "He understands that we need safety," Desba said, her voice steady. "He understands that we need food and shelter and education. He understands that we are people who deserve to be treated with dignity. These things are not about being white or Apache. They are about being human." The courtroom stirred at this response. Even Judge Morrison's stern expression seemed to soften slightly. Haskins tried a few more questions but could not shake Desba's testimony. She was dismissed and returned to sit beside Samuel, who squeezed her hand in silent support. Kaya was called next, and Samuel's heart ached as he watched the younger girl walk to the witness stand. She looked so small in the large chair, her feet barely touching the ground. But, like her sister, she answered Whitmore's questions with honesty and clarity. "Do you like living with Mr. Ebisess?" "Hartford?" Whitmore asked. "Yes," Kaya said simply. "He is kind. He makes me feel safe. What do you do at the ranch?" Kaya's face brightened. "I help with the chickens in the garden. Samuel is teaching me to read, and I am learning to ride horses. Desba and I have our own room, and Samuel tells us stories sometimes at night. If you could choose, would you want to stay with Mr. Funt's Hartford or go to the San Carlos Reservation?" Kaya's expression grew serious. "I want to stay with Samuel. He He is like family now. Haskins' cross-examination of Kaya was mercifully brief. Even he seemed reluctant to be too harsh with such a young child. When she was dismissed, she ran back to Samuel and buried her face against his shoulder. Finally, it was Samuel's turn to testify. He took the stand and swore to tell the truth, then faced Whitmore's questions about his background, his finances, and his motivations for seeking guardianship. "Mr. Hartford, why did you take these girls in?" Whitmore asked. Samuel took a moment to gather his thoughts. "Because they were children in need and I had the means to help them. It seemed like the only decent thing to do. Many people in your position would have turned them away. Why didn't you?" "I lost my wife 7 years ago," Samuel said quietly. "This house has been empty since then. When I saw those girls on my porch, cold and scared and desperate, I saw an opportunity to do something good with the life I had left, to make my home a home again." "Do you love these girls, Mr. Weller?" "Hartford?" The question surprised Samuel. He looked over at Desba and Kaya, sitting together on the bench, watching him with hope and trust in their eyes. "Yes," he said, and he realized as he said it that it was completely true. "Yes, I do. They've become my daughters in every way that matters." Haskins' cross-examination was aggressive. He questioned Samuel's ability to teach the girls about their Apache heritage, suggested that the arrangement was inappropriate, and even implied that Samuel might have less than honorable intentions. But Samuel remained calm, answering each accusation with quiet dignity. When the testimony concluded, Judge Morrison called for closing arguments. Haskins went first, arguing that the law did not support this kind of cross-cultural guardianship, that the proper place for Apache children was with their own people on the reservation, and that setting this precedent would lead to chaos. Then Whitmore stood for his closing argument. He spoke passionately about the fundamental purpose of guardianship law, to protect children and ensure their welfare. He described the conditions at San Carlos, citing reports of disease, malnutrition, and inadequate resources. He contrasted that with the stable, loving home Samuel could provide. "Your Honor," Whitmore concluded, "the law exists to serve justice, not to create suffering. 2 children have found safety and love in a home that welcomes them. A good man has opened his heart and his home to give them a future. The color of their skin, the heritage of their birth, these things matter far less than the simple truth that they are children who deserve a chance at a good life. I urge you to grant this petition." Judge Morrison sat in silence for what felt like an eternity. The courtroom was so quiet that Samuel could hear his own heartbeat pounding in his ears. Finally, the judge spoke. "This court will take a brief recess to consider the matter. We will reconvene in 1 hour." The wait was agonizing. Samuel, Desba, and Kaya sat together on a bench outside the courtroom, not speaking, each lost in their own thoughts. Whitmore paced nearby, occasionally checking his pocket watch. Martha and Jacob offered words of encouragement, but Samuel could barely hear them over the roaring anxiety in his mind. When they were finally called back into the courtroom, Samuel felt as though he was walking to meet his fate. They took their seats, and Judge Morrison surveyed the room before beginning to speak. "This court has given careful consideration to this petition," the judge said. "It is indeed unprecedented in this territory. There are valid concerns about cultural preservation and appropriate placement of Apache children. However, the court must also consider the specific circumstances of this case." Samuel held his breath. "The court has heard testimony that these children are orphans with no family to care for them. The alternative to Mr. Hartford's guardianship would be placement at San Carlos Reservation, where conditions are, by all accounts, extremely difficult. The court has also heard compelling testimony about Mr. Hartford's character and his genuine commitment to these children's welfare." Judge Morrison paused, and Samuel thought his heart might stop. "Most significantly, the court has heard from the children themselves. Their testimony was clear and credible. They wish to remain with Mr. Hartford, and they appear to be thriving in his care. While this situation is unusual, the paramount concern of this court must be the best interests of the children." The judge looked directly at Samuel. "Therefore, the petition for guardianship is granted. Samuel Hartford is hereby named the legal guardian of Desba and Kaya. This guardianship comes with full parental rights and responsibilities. Mr. Hartford, you are now legally responsible for these children's welfare, education, and upbringing. Do you understand and accept these responsibilities?" "I do, Your Honor," Samuel said, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you," the courtroom erupted. Some people cheered while others grumbled in disapproval. Samuel barely heard any of it. He turned to find both girls staring at him with tears streaming down their faces. Kaya launched herself into his arms, and Desba followed more slowly but with equal emotion. The 3 of them held each other tightly, a family finally recognized by law as what they had already become in their hearts. In the years that followed, Samuel Hartford's ranch became known throughout the territory, though not always favorably. Some neighbors never forgave him for his choice. Tom Pritchard and others like him refused to do business with him. But others, inspired by his example, began to question their own prejudices and assumptions. Desba grew into a remarkable young woman, skilled in both Apache traditions and the ways of ranch life. She eventually married a good man, a ranch hand named Thomas, who loved her fierce spirit and gentle heart. They built a small house on land adjacent to Samuel's ranch, and Desba raised her children with stories of both their Apache heritage and the white rancher who had saved their mother's life. Kaya discovered a gift for working with horses that was almost magical. She could gentle the wildest Mustang, heal injured animals, and breed horses that were prized throughout Arizona territory. Her reputation spread far beyond Copper Springs, and people came from hundreds of miles away to buy her horses or seek her expertise. Samuel lived to see his grandchildren, beautiful children who carried the blood of both Apache and white settlers in their veins. On summer evenings, he would sit on his porch with Desba and Kaya and their families, watching the children play in the yard where two frightened girls had once stood begging for shelter. In his final years, when visitors would ask about his famous decision to adopt Apache children, Samuel would always tell them about that stormy night and the choice he had faced. He spoke of standing before Marshal Thornton and claiming those girls as his daughters, of the fear and uncertainty of waiting for the judge's decision. "Those 3 words I spoke to Marshal Thornton," Samuel would say, his weathered face peaceful with memory. "When I told him those girls were my daughters, that was the truest thing I ever said in my life, not because of blood or law, but because that's what they had become." Family isn't just about who you're born to. Sometimes it's about who you choose and who chooses you back. Samuel Hartford died peacefully in his sleep at the age of 72, surrounded by his daughters and grandchildren. The ranch he had built through hard work and determination passed to Desba and Kaya, who continued to run it together, honoring the man who had taught them that compassion could be more powerful than prejudice, and that family was defined not by law or blood, but by love. The legacy of that stormy autumn night in 1886 lived on through generations. The family that began with 3 simple words, "Come in, please," proved that even in the darkest times, even when division and hatred seemed overwhelming, one person's choice to show mercy could change the world for those who mattered most. And sometimes, that's all it takes to make something beautiful from something broken. The courage to open your door, open your heart, and let love define what family means.